in spite of the seeming indifference that Afro-Mexicans may reflect with relation to their history and their past, if you scratch a little bit, you'd find that they're really and deeply interested. And perhaps the seeming indifference is a kind of defense that marginalized people somehow or the other seem to carry, to wear, to protect themselves. So I call this Mexico, Black Mexico, Mexico Negro. It's people, it's, yeah. We talk about the story of this young man. He's from Quahiniquilapa. When he was 17, he graduated from preparatory school, one of the best. For some reason, he failed 2 of his subjects, and he had to repeat. His father is Afro-Mexican, his mother is indigenous from the Amuzgo group, and he's the second of 5 children, and when, a few years after coming together, they moved from a very small community to Quahiniquilapa, which is a community of about 10,000 on the Pacific coast of Guerrero. He took up photography, he's one of the best students. He's now working in a store. Between then and now, he got married, he did quite a few odd jobs, and his eldest brother, he's the second child of his family, of his parents, his elder brother was murdered. Young people from a marginalized community, perhaps sooner than other groups, tend to say, we can't make it. If you're told often enough that because you're indigenous or because you're black, you can't make it, you can only do manual jobs, or that kind of profession is not for people like you, which is a very common term that parents use to their children up to today, sooner or later that young person will say, as I've heard thousands of times, mi cabeza no da. That means my brains just can't handle that. So they're opting out of the system. And it's the result of so many things. The fact is that the marginalization will grow. And generation after generation, there'll be more. There's a report that came out in March by a group of lawyers sponsored by the Organization of American States that talks about racism as it affects Afrodescendants. And it's saying basically that it's still a problem and not much has been done to change it. The report cites the unwillingness of governments and the ability to hide the problem. And one of the ways in which the problem is hidden is by not counting blacks. And Mexico is a typical example of that. In 1993, we had a meeting with the number 2 person in the INI. INI is el Instituto Nacional Indigenista. That's the organization, government-sponsored organization looking after indigenous affairs. Now the irony is that Afro-Mexicans must knock on their door to be attended to, because there's no government organization that looks after affairs relating to the Afro-Mexican population. So we have to go through the indigenous board. Now that gentleman said in '93, if you want Afro-Mexicans to be included in some way, 1 or 2 or 3 questions in the next national census, which will come up in 2010, you must begin making a lot of noise right away. That was '93. We didn't make much noise, to be honest. We couldn't. That's our fault. But last year at a meeting, that point came up and the answer was it's now too late because the instruments to be used in the next census in 2010, they're already being prepared. And it means then that we have to wait until the 2020 census before you have something that is a basic right to be counted, to be considered, to be part of the demographic and social and political map of the country. Other countries have made changes. One such country was Colombia. But there have been complaints that whereas the census, I don't know if anyone has the figure, I think the census put the Afro-Colombian population at about 16%. Claims are that it's almost twice the size, a tremendous amount of underrepresentation. And they give, among others, two reasons which are interesting. They said, one, there were not sufficient Afro-Colombians taking up the data in the Afro-Colombian community. Now that may seem a bit far-fetched, but thinking about it, if an Afro-Colombian or Afro-Mexican had to identify himself to someone taking up the census, and that person were white Colombian, the answer would be a bit different than if that person, asking the questions were to be someone looking like him. So they claim that that was, and the other reason being the tendency among all Afro-descendants and all Afro-descendants all over, not only in Latin America, and here as well, I'm sure, to sort of hide, to disguise themselves, and there are historic reasons for that. People are not always for coming together of diaspora peoples, African diaspora peoples, is not too far away. Is happening at a faster rate now for so many reasons, communication and so on, and universities that are opening up Afro-Latin Studies department. Although we have to be careful, I was talking with Dr. Hernandez, I think that the risk is the Afro-Latin component is being shaped by the agenda, the African Studies agenda, which perhaps could be renewed in some way if the comparative element gets more and more into it. And that will come when we open our eyes more and more to the tremendous transformations that have taken place and are taking place in Latin America. Remember, only less than 500,000 African slaves came to the United States. And if we agree with the figures that 12 million landed in the Americas, well, we're talking about 23 to 1. 23 slaves went to the rest of the Americas, to everyone who came here. So that should force us then into that kind of, comparative.
Have you seen any changes in television and media, whereas that people are represented, or people can see a reflection of themselves in the media?
No.
No?
In Mexico, nothing at all. In Colombia, it's beginning, and in Venezuela. In Mexico, no way. Unless we have people like you want to come to Mexico for a year or two to begin to produce something that is more culturally...
Of course.
You're welcome.
Wow.
We need Afro-Mexicans who can articulate and who are willing to look at their own reality and project it. We do not have them. So if the university here wants to set up a program tomorrow, whatever I can do to make it happen, come to me.
Okay.
All right. Well, Father, we actually at work began, and also Antonio Cal.
So I chose the right person?
He said Edward Banks, he remember he was in Veracruz, and we did some filming of San Juan de Ulua. He was one of the guys
2 years
the
ago.
camera.
Yeah,
so we are already engaged actively in bringing to light this situation, and we will be working on trying to develop a program where we can...
We can offer you a place to sleep, even if it's a hammock.
No scorpions.
The beach is just a stone's throw away, and you won't starve.